and welcome to Fine Art Friday. If you joined me last fall, you might remember that each month we talked about different art movements and artists who helped make those movements happen and then created our own projects, usually paintings based on those styles we talked about. This year, I want to keep learning about art, but instead of art movements, I want to talk about art mediums or different materials that are used to create art. We'll still look at artists who use these mediums and feature these kinds of art, and then of course you'll get new materials to try out at home. Alrighty, let's get started. This month we're learning about Scratchboard and Scratch art. Scratchboard art is done on a sheet of paper or a board covered in a thin layer of ink. There are large sheets of Scratchboard, but you might have also seen it done on small bookmark-sized pieces as well. To make art on a Scratchboard, the artist uses sharp utensils to scrape away the ink on the top layer, revealing a color underneath. Most of the time this color is white, but they also make rainbow-colored sheets as well. After the top layer of black ink is scratched away, the artist can also use watercolor paints to add color to their art. Let's look at a children's book illustrator who uses Scratchboard art. Beth Crumbs is an artist from Pennsylvania. She likes to paint, design patterns, and do wood carvings. Wood carving is actually what led her to Scratchboard art. Both wood carving and Scratchboard art are types of etching, or removing art. To create the final piece, you take away elements, rather than adding them, like paint, onto a blank canvas. This type of art takes a lot of planning ahead, because after you've taken away material, it's really hard and sometimes impossible to add it back on. Crumbs has created many illustrations for children's books. Her most popular work, the illustrations in The House in the Night by Susan Marie Swanson, even won a Caldecott Award for how good they were. Let's take a look at some of those illustrations. Remember when you're looking at these, the black parts are what Beth Crumbs started with. The white parts are the parts she etched away to make a picture with, and the yellow are white parts she painted afterwards. One of the coolest features of Scratchboard art is how the artist makes texture, or how they make things look smooth, rough, fuzzy, etc. Artists use methods called hatching, cross-hatching, and stippling to make these textures look real. Check out the animals in The House in the Night. The cat and dog both have small lines going down their back that look like fur. The cat's lines look very sleek because they are not touching, and the dog's lines, or fur, look a little fluffier because the lines overlap. In the creation part of this video, I'll teach you more about how to make your lines look like different textures. Let's look at a few more of Beth Crumbs' illustrations. I really like this one because you can see the original black background she was working with. To make a solid night sky, she just left it alone and let the sun and planets stand out for themselves. Now this background has a little bit more going on. Crumbs added different types of grasses, fields, houses, trees, and hills. You can see all of these from a distance, but let's zoom in so you can see the differences up close. For her grass, Crumbs used short lines stacked around each other. For this rougher looking grass over here, she used cross-hatching, or lots of little lines going in different directions. Look at this little field. I love it. Crumbs used neat little rows of lines to make the rows of crops, and even added little other V marks that made it look like the field was growing. The House in the Night primarily features black and white with just yellow added to make certain elements stand out. Let's take a look at two other books Beth Crumbs illustrated that use a little bit more color. Swirl by Swirl and Butterfly Eyes and Other Secrets of the Meadow both feature beautiful landscapes and colorful animals. I absolutely love this ocean scene in Swirl by Swirl. The warm colors from the sun and the cool blues and greens that make up the water are so beautiful. I also think that Crumbs did a really good job of showing movement with lines in this picture. Water is hard to draw. It doesn't really have any lines, but Crumbs used smooth curves to make the waves rise up and out of the water. If you've ever been to the ocean, you might know that waves sometimes look white on the top from the foam created by the movement. Crumbs was able to add this feature to the waves by scratching away all the ink in those areas, and then just leaving them blank. Butterfly Eyes and Other Secrets of the Meadow is all about creatures and plants that live in a grassy meadow or field. There are foxes, rabbits, and deer that have lines that look just like fur, just like in our A House in the Dark pictures. But there are also reptiles and amphibians. I want to show you all these pictures because the idea of drawing lots of tiny scales or making a frog's skin look smooth can be hard to imagine. Check out how Beth Crumbs did it. For the snake scales, Croms used a diamond pattern and then added little lines to each diamond to make them unique. I love this toad because he's bumpy and smooth at the same time. For the bumps, Crom scratched circles and added texture to them, and then to make his smooth belly and skin, she used long, straight lines that don't overlap. We have all 3 books featured in this video available at Tremont District Library. Beth Croms has also made illustrations for many other books too, so ask us about those as well. If you want to see more of her art, you can also check out her website. I'll put a link in the description. Are you guys ready to create your own Scratchboard art? Let's get to it! Alright, first things first, let's go through your kit. You have a texture guide, a big sheet of Scratchboard, a Scratchboard bookmark, 3 small sheets of practice Scratchboard, and a scratching tool. Please be careful with your scratching tool. It is sharp. If you want to add color to your works of art at the end, you'll also need watercolor paints. Since a lot of Scratchboard art involves creating textures, let's learn how to do that. Artists use techniques called hatching, cross-hatching, and stippling to create different textures and shading in their art. These are pretty simple, and when you combine them, you can create really detailed and really realistic art. If you want a few more examples for textures, check out your texture guide. This isn't a list of all the textures, obviously, but it's a good place to get started and get you thinking creatively. Hatching is just lots of parallel lines. They can go in any direction, and they can be as far apart or as close as you'd like. Usually, the closer they are, the darker an area looks, so they're great for shading. Cross-hatching is very similar to hatching, but the lines you're using are crossing each other. This is another great way to make shading. Stippling is tiny dots close together and far apart. The closer they are, the darker they usually look, and the further apart, the lighter. The best way to hold your scratching tool is like a pencil. Then make the curved blade like a shovel with the bowl side down. Then push away from you to remove ink. If you use just the tip, you'll make thin lines, and if you use more of the side, they'll be thicker. Okay, here's where Scratchboards get a little tricky. Notice how when we tried out hatching, cross-hatching, and stippling with a pencil on paper, it made it look like the light was hitting the piece of the shape that we didn't draw on? When you use these techniques on Scratchboard, it will be the opposite. So the same shapes drawn on Scratchboard make the shading on the opposite side. The more you scratch, the lighter your image becomes. And if you're working on a piece where you want lots of shadows and highlights from the sun or another light source, you'll want to pay attention to this. If you want to just enjoy your Scratchboard and make different patterns and designs, don't worry about it. Scratchboards take a little bit more planning ahead because you're removing ink and you can't easily replace it. One of the ways you can make art with a Scratchboard is to plan it out ahead of time. I chose to do a little mountain scene. I didn't put all the details in my practice sheet, but I made an idea, so I had a plan for my final piece. Sorry, it's hard to remember to stay in the camera frame when you get into your art. Another method for Scratchboard art is just to go crazy. Don't make a plan, just make designs as you feel.
In this design, I used lots of long lines, I made swirls, I carved away entire areas, I made triangles. Really, you can do anything. Make a pattern or texture that looks cool to you. Another way to do scratchboard art is working from a picture. I chose to use this picture of my cat, Little Bird, and try to recreate her. You can sketch lightly on your scratchboard, but it doesn't erase well, so only mark lines where you want it to scratch if you don't want to be able to see your pencil lines afterwards. Animals are pretty hard because fur is pretty hard. Remember Beth Crom's animals? They were pretty simple. I'm trying to make my cat look a little bit more realistic here, so I'm going to add in lots of tiny lines for her fur. Now, she doesn't end up perfect, but you can kind of tell what she is, right? For her white parts, I just scratched more, and then for the lighter parts I scratched a little bit more too. Her whiskers were easy because I just got to make long, simple lines. If you want to do an animal, practice their different textures on your practice sheets before you go to your big one. Scratching my boards, I think I want to add color to my designs. Watercolor paints work really well because they show up on the white parts of your design, but not as well on the black ink. You can add full colors to your piece, or just use one color as an accent like Beth Crom's did in The House in the Night. Bookmark in your kit is for fun too. The background on this sheet is a rainbow, like we mentioned earlier in the video. Have fun designing your bookmark and then use it in the next great book that you read. Have fun with your scratchboards, and as always, I would love to see what you create. Post pictures in the comments, email me pictures, or come show me in person at the library. I hope you all enjoyed this Fine Art Friday, and I'll see you again next month for a lesson in chalk and oil pastels. Bye, friends!